Welcome to Leadership and Life Chat with your hosts, me, Becky Ames.
And me, Mark Curtis. In each episode, we'll be illustrating how success in leadership is inextricably linked with success in life.
Whether it's leadership in business, society, family or friends, we're all leaders.
Using our experiences and a range of expert guests, we'll share secrets to boosting your health, wealth and self.
So let's get on with the show. We've all worked for old bosses. Or maybe we've looked in the mirror and thought, ooh, was I one today? Today we are joined by guest Rob Kalwarowsky, who works with people to develop their leadership style and to really overcome those traits and behaviours, help them understand what they're all about and to spot them in others. This is a fascinating conversation, which we know you're going to enjoy. Rob, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us. Just for the benefit of our listeners, could you give us a brief summary of your current roles, what you get up to, and how you got to that point?
Yeah, I'm a high-performance leadership coach for Elite High Performance and the co-host of the Leadership Launchpad Project podcast. Earlier this summer, and the topic that we're going to be talking about soon, I did a TED Talk on how to deal with an boss. And so I guess a long story to get to kind of the short end of it. When I started my career, I suffered from a bad boss and it led to mental health struggles that I had. I kept thinking, maybe it was just this one company. And then I kept going. I was a consultant for a while and I went to 50 or 60 different companies and I kept seeing similar things across heavy industry. About 5 years ago, I started my own leadership journey, learning about what leadership could be, diving deep into my mindset and psychology and really pivoting my life. And that led me to becoming a leadership coach and all the work I've done since then around bad bosses, around mindset, and around helping leaders become better. So it's been a wild journey, but we'll get more into it, I'm sure.
I mean, Mark and I couldn't wait for this podcast recording because this is just absolutely so up our street in terms of your journey and the time you've invested in energy in developing your own leadership and your mindset. Do you want to sort of lead us into what you found, what you see in terms of particularly these bosses, as you call them?
Sure. I mean, why don't I ask you both a question? When you think of boss, what are the characteristics or traits or behaviors that you think of?
Ooh, go on, Mark.
Oh, crikey, wow. Yeah, I mean, this is interesting, isn't it? Because, on this call, we've all been on both sides of the fence. We've both been on the end of bosses who we thought, what? I don't really get how they've become a boss, and I don't really get why they're kind of dumping on me. And then we've been on the other side of it, which is we've become bosses. So I think, yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? So some of the things I guess I've seen in my career, you've got the people who maybe have massive insecurity themselves in their role as a leader. So actually, rather than, and it's the old adage of, pick people up, not put them down, but you almost get those bosses who are so insecure, they put people down just to try and make themselves feel better, which is terrible for the team around them. And I've definitely experienced that one, where they have to be top dog for their own self-esteem. So that's definitely one for me. What about you, Becky?
I think the inability to listen to others is a big one for me, and probably something that I notice more as I am investing time in my own sort of development over recent years about how important that is. And when you see it in others, you just think, oh, you really want them to kind of get it, don't you? You're just like, oh, just step back, stop, pause, think. So I think that inability to listen to people in their team, and there's lots of things.
I've got another one.
Go on, go for it.
So I mean, it could be a theme on the first one, but there's also like the arrogant, patronizing boss who just thinks they know everything and like just know your place. Like, do you not realize how good I am or how experienced I am? And you know nothing. There's that kind of patronizing arrogance one as well, which is not great.
The boss that doesn't engage the team on the journey, so it's their way or the highway. that really, seen that quite a lot. The tricky bit here is that Mark and I have both worked for this firm for quite some time. So the bosses over most of our careers will have been
are listening to the show right
where
now.
we work. I'm not.
I mean, I'd just like to say for the record, these are things that my friends have told me about people they work for. Is what I'm describing today.
Yeah. No, I doubt they're listening, Rob, to be fair. But so Rob, back to you. What was the main issue that you had when you first recognised this in your own employment with the very challenging boss that kind of sparked this thought process in you?
The first thing I wanted to just say is what Mark started with these elements of deep insecurity. That's often why a lot of the bad boss behaviors begin. So none of us are bad people. Even the bosses out there, if you notice as we're talking about these behaviors, it's not you. It's actual survival strategy that your mindset learned in order for you to stay safe and alive. And this can also mean like needing to feel like you're the best person in the room or not listening to others or all these things, right? And so that's why the work I do with leaders basically centralizes around mindset work first before we dig into high performance leadership strategies like building psychological safety and trust and feedback. Because ultimately, if we don't change our minds, we can never actually sustainably change our behaviors for a long time. Now, back to the boss types. The research identifies 6 different destructive leadership types. And the first one is the arrogant and violent boss. These are folks that they punish their employees. They don't trust them. They can be violent physically or verbally. Basically, they put others down and they kind of put themselves forward. The second type that's kind of similar, they're known as the abusive narcissist. And so they're very egocentric. They're very much about me. They do also not trust their employees. They take credit for their employees' work. They punish people when their demands aren't met. And so they're similar, slightly different. Both of these categories make up about 25% of the workforce experiences those type of bosses. So it's a significant portion, like a quarter of folks have a boss like that.
Wow.
Then we have the passive types of bosses. So these are bosses, the research calls them messy bosses and cowardly bosses. I don't necessarily like the term cowardly. I also like the word ghost manager for this, but it's basically bosses that maybe they don't believe that they're able to lead. Maybe they feel like they're not good enough. Sometimes folks who get promoted and there's folks on their team that are more experienced or older, or they feel a certain way about the other leaders, they end up in this category where they feel like they can't take responsibility or accountability because someone knows better, or I shouldn't be here, like that kind of chatter. And so basically that's what they do. They avoid making decisions. They avoid taking responsibility and accountability. Messy bosses, typically these are folks that just haven't learned how to manage people well. And so it just means they're not great at specifications or deadlines, or, maybe they flip-flop from ideas. I had a manager once that he would go to a conference or read a new book every month, and it would be like, let's do this now. Let's do this now. Right. And then the joke was, it was the flavor of the month.
Knee jerking.
Yeah. And then the last 2 destructive leadership types are they're known as combination types. So you have the passive aggressive leader and the passive egocentric. Passive aggressive, all of us know what that is, right? We're sort of avoiding confrontation, but maybe we're gaslighting our folks. Maybe we're taking credit behind their back. Maybe we're judging them behind their back, those type of behaviors. And then the passive egocentric, again, it's just they're taking credit for work and passing blame behind folks' back. All in all, the total is about 65% of employees experience one of those toxic bosses or bad bosses or destructive leaders. So if you've had more than one job, it's likely you've experienced a few different types of these bad bosses.
That's shocking, isn't it? 65%. There's a lot of them about, it seems. So, I mean, I think we can certainly identify in terms of experience with all of those different types in different ways. And I guess it's how experience often teaches us how to deal with things, doesn't it? So, you know, you can learn sometimes, but some of it's so extreme, it can be really damaging, can't it, Rob?
Absolutely. And so this is where the mindset piece really comes in to play. And then also, how are you impacting folks, right? Like toxic workplaces increase the risk of heart attacks and strokes. They also increase the risk of major disease and depression, anxiety, burnout, all of these things. Of course, I experienced it where it led to a suicide attempt, but it's not always that bad, right? But I mean, it's actually like the research talks about how companies lead their people is the number 5 cause of death in the United States. And so this is a massive problem that not many people are talking about.
Yeah, that's unbelievable, isn't it?
Number 5 cause. Wow.
Everything, right? Like it's stress, it's increased heart attacks, like even stuff like diabetes or major disease like cancer, those kind of things. It's basically like the more stress you're under, the more your body is, um, in pain.
Yeah. And like the irony with all of this is, you know, 65% of employees, as you said there, Rob, will experience this, and this is at a time where, you know, we've talked a lot on this show about, you know, the war for talent. We've had people on talking about, you know, the Great Resignation, all of those issues that, you know, the quiet quitting, which is now seems to be the most recent one. So we've got leaders who desperately need to attract, retain the right people in their business for the success of everybody. Yet there's a massive disconnect between that and the overall quality of leadership across the board in businesses in Western culture. You could, I mean, I'm sure you could map this across to pretty much any Western culture anyway, because it's just how people tick, isn't it? You know, and you think this is just flashing out there for leaders to invest in themselves, to be the best possible version of themselves, if nothing else, to protect their business, let alone the health of their employees.
Oh yeah. Right. And what you talked about there, right, with the quiet quitting and great resignation, right? Like these are often tied, I mean, they're tied directly to employee engagement. And 70% of employee engagement is directly tied to the specific manager. It's not even, the CEO or anything like that. It's like literally the person's manager themselves. And so if you look up on Gallup, you can see the stats where employee engagement is directly related to profitability, productivity, employee reduced turnover, reduced absenteeism, like all these good things. And then also the people are happier and healthier, which is another side benefit, which is actually really good, right? Um, but what you mentioned, Mark, is a big problem, right? So the research talks about when do folks get leadership training? And on average, people become leaders or supervisors at 29 years old, and they get leadership development at 42. So there's a 13-year gap where, hey, you were good at sales. Why don't you just lead a team? Or you're a great accountant, you're a great engineer, you're promoted, right? And then we learn based on what we see around us. We learn from coaches or teachers or our parents, and then we kind of just throw it together and hope. Obviously, it's not working. And then the other side of it is the leadership development that folks are getting. 75% of it is ineffective because it doesn't address mindset. And so if we're talking about how do we create change for folks who are, you know, experiencing a lot of these bad boss behaviors, often it's because I believe something about me that makes me behave in this way. Because otherwise, I would ask my experts on my team to do the work they're experts in, or I would listen to my team so then I could understand what are all their perspectives, right?
Yeah.
Like there's tons of data on that, right? But it's like ultimately what we believe about ourselves makes us behave in ways. And if we don't address those, then the rest of it's just a band-aid.
It's interesting there, Rob, what you were saying about, 29 being the average age when people become a leader, and then 42 to get the leadership development. I mean, that's just unbelievable, isn't it? And like with all these things, the easiest things to talk about yourself because you've been part of your own story, and um, I became a partner in our business at the age of 31. So that's when I officially became a leader, if you like. I was a manager before that, etc. And I was talking to a member of my team who's been in that team since I became a partner, and he said to me, "Do you know what, Mark? Like as you go, because we've always had personal development training. This is something we've been fortunate that." Becky and I have had this ever since we were pre-partners. This stuff has gone on within our business, and we were very fortunate to be part of that. And we've invested in ourselves as well. And this guy said to me, I could see you relax into your role, and as you relaxed into your role, your leadership style relaxed as well. And I thought really long and hard about what he'd said to me, and I thought, yeah, when I was 31, I didn't have the confidence and the experience. And I just joined the partnership, and I was then about to start climbing the greasy pole of the partnership ladder. So I was desperate to succeed, and you're putting more pressure on yourself, which means you're putting yourself in a more stressful situation, which means you are probably more reactive. You're probably a little bit more touchy, because you're not comfortable in your own skin. So as you feel you've got less to prove to the business because you're comfortable with your own position, I think for my own personal journey, that's when I really started to relax into. I could really take on board things like the Jocko Willink, extreme ownership stuff. I could really take that on board. I always wanted to protect my team, but there was always that, but I don't want to be the one who has to then be, the senior partner saying it was Mark's fault, and I don't think I ever threw anyone under the bus that I can remember, but that thought process was there as a young leader. But as I became a more mature leader, I didn't care about throwing myself under the bus because it's like, well, fine, I'm big enough and ugly enough to take it. And so I think, as you say, no one sets out to be a bad boss, but if you can go on that journey of discovery yourself, you kind of, and you lean into some of these difficult things that you've got to contend with within your own career, then I think you give yourself the maximum chance to become a better leader.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And what you're mentioning, Mark, is something that's super common, right? And I saw the stat somewhere, 70% of the world feels imposter syndrome. I actually think it's 100, but it just depends what room you're in, right? But everyone's felt it at some point.
Yeah.
And it's like, if we feel that in our careers, in our jobs, when the CEO comes down and says, "Hey, Rob, what are you doing on this project?" then it makes us behave in these certain ways that can be either abusive or narcissistic, or it can be, we're shifting blame. It can be the passive aggressiveness. It's all these things that we've learned when we were kids, basically. Ultimately, what you were mentioning, Mark, about how you gain confidence, it's really just more about you were gaining trust in yourself. And you didn't need to prove to yourself that you were good enough to have this role. And that's the big mindset shift.
I think it's also a case of, and Mark and I probably both experienced this as we've been here in the same firm for quite some time, is the fact that whilst you know all the characters involved, you think you've got to do things the way that they've done it because that's how you succeed. And that's, and it's even when you've been somewhere a long time, settling into a new role and then feeling confident enough to be able to do it in your own style, in your own way, can be quite challenging, can't it? In terms of you've kind of got there, and you've got to do it how everyone else does it. I remember that feeling of I can't sort of say how I want to do it because I'm the new girl in the gang kind of thing. And whether you're new to a business or you've been there a very long time, there can be different challenges, but they're very much around, have I got the right to be here? That's when those poor behaviours really display themselves, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And these behaviors, like we always talk about, the road to the mindset is through emotions. And so I always use this example where, let's imagine we're stopped at a stoplight and there's a car in front of us. Light turns green, person doesn't go. Almost always we get frustrated. Right? And let's say like literally these people took 1 full minute, which would be an absolute insane amount of time. But if we look at it from just this perspective of like a higher being or something, it would not impact our life at all. If we were already late, we'd be 1 minute later, doesn't matter. We get frustrated, we get angry, some like people honk the horns, like we see all these things. And it's always comes back to like, what does this mean about me? And the excavation to understand what the belief is always an I am or I am not statement about my sort of self concept. And for me, a lot of the roots was around I'm not accepted. For other folks, it could be I'm powerless, I'm not loved, I'm not seen, I'm not heard. There's stuff like that. Ultimately, the behavior can be very similar. All of us get angry at the stoplight, right? But once we start to understand what these beliefs are about ourselves, and everyone has, around 2 or 3 that are very core to their identity, that's when we can heal those things. And then you're just stopped at a stoplight. You can choose how you want to feel.
That reminds me of, I was reading a book years ago. I think it was the Jon Kabat-Zinn around mindful meditation. I can't remember the title of the book now, but he quoted a Chinese philosopher, and I think it was impatience is like trying to push a stream and make it go quicker. And then where you have impatience, it leads to anger. Where you have frustration, it leads to anger. Where you have anger, it leads to outright aggression. So then it's like finding techniques, isn't it? So every time I find myself getting irritated because the car in front is going too slow or whatever it might be, I automatically click into, you're trying to push a stream quicker, Mark. And as soon as I do that, I can like get myself out of it. Because if I don't do that, then that whole process happens still. So, and I don't know which philosopher it was, but it's probably like 4,000 years ago. It just shows, doesn't it, that some of this is just absolutely like ingrained in us. Unless we choose to make a conscious decision differently, we know where it's going to end up.
And that's the sinister part about a lot of this, right? Is 95 to 97% of our decisions we make every day are subconscious. So it's just what you said, Mark, is we just get mad and then we honk the horn, right? But if we can either pull it into our conscious, which is what you're doing, and going, oh, I'm not happy. Oh yeah, it's because I'm trying to push a stream. Then we can choose, oh, well, maybe we don't want to do this. And that's the same thing at work, right? Like we've all gotten an email and gone, oh, this person's stupid or this deadline's insane, right?
Yeah.
But if we can take that moment and go, well, what's their perspective? Or am I reading this right? Then sometimes we can choose to respond more effectively.
Mark often says to me, Becky, you're choosing to react that way. It's your choice. Which in the moment can be really, really frustrating.
and without getting too deep on this, I've been listening to, there's a lot of work at the moment about whether free choice is actually an illusion or not, but we don't need to go there today. For the purposes of today, we believe we have a choice, but we won't touch on that one today. But I will talk to you about it outside the podcast, Becky.
Oh, see, now we've started something else. So you said that we're talking about people becoming leaders typically around the age of 29, and then they don't get any training until 42. And often promotion to those positions is because someone's been in a role a while, and they're technically competent, experienced, whatever it might be. And then that next stage is a whole different thing, isn't it? And we've seen it so many times, both ourselves and and in our teams about how it's such a different skill set. So in your view, Rob, when should this stuff start? When should we start actually investing in ourselves and our people to make sure that we're creating the leaders of the future that we really want?
I mean, to be honest, a lot of this skill set, like even just emotional intelligence and empathy, we could be teaching this in elementary school. It'd be great for everyone to learn. I mean, realistically, if we're a company and we're concerned about growing and succeeding, we should be giving development to everyone. And when I coach leadership, it's not only about folks who are going to be in a management role. It's also we've had folks go, you know what, I just want to be the best individual contributor. But now I know what I'm inspired to do, where my direction is in the future, and any stumbling blocks that I come across, now I have the mindset where I can learn how to overcome those in the long term. Because some of these masks that we're wearing that are creating the bad boss behaviors, they also make us, if we're an individual contributor, maybe we're working to burnout. Maybe we're driving ourselves to be perfect. Like these are the same things that, like, the belief follows us. So if we're a leader or not, like we're still having the same stuff.
Yeah. And it impacts on every aspect of your life, doesn't it? And so much of the investment that certainly I've done in reading and listening and is not business related. I think Mark and I were talking about this the other day. It's every other aspect of life, but it just interweaves, and it's about how you are as a person, isn't it? And like you say, it's that mindset. But it's not something that can be, and this is stating the obvious, taught in a half-day course, is it? And then off you go, you're done. It is a constant investment in being or doing things in the best way, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I could teach it to you in 4 hours. But you can see results fairly quickly. But it's a daily practice. So like I've worked with clients 2-3 weeks and they're happier, their perspectives have changed, but they're like, we're doing 2 or 3 sessions together, and then they're also doing 5 minutes, 10 minutes every day of deliberate work, right? And it's sustainable. Like I do those exercises still to this day, right? Now they've changed because I've changed my mind, but it's not a practice that you just like, I wish I could 4 hours. Like, yeah, like it's the same thing. Like I could teach you emotional intelligence in 30 minutes, right? But it's like actually being emotionally intelligent takes practice. And that's the nature of being a leader. Like you never finish. There's no perfect leader. Being the best we can be it takes work and development, but it does change your life. I can tell you that for sure.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts off the back of that. When you were talking about, this should be taught in schools at a younger age, and I was reflecting on. I mean, I'm sure it's very different to when I started school in 1979. I mean, they don't beat kids up like they used to in 1979 for a start. You did something wrong, whack, mark, you stupid boy. It's like so stuff. Times have changed, but the one thing which I reflect back on now is, apart from soccer in the US, football in the UK, that was kind of the only team sport you had. So you sit exams individual, you do tests individual, you stand up in front of the class doing spelling tests individual, you get something wrong, people laugh at you. Everything is individual success. And even we did a lot of athletics at the school I was at, so you're doing, like, I don't know, track and field individual. There's no team. You might be part of like a group, but it's still your performance, and either you win or someone else wins, or you come last or someone else comes last. And that's kind of ingrained into certainly my generation. I don't know I haven't got kids, so I don't know what it's like now. I can't believe it's drastically different. So you've got all of this, you've got it's dog eat dog, you've got to trample over and climb over other people to get to the top. And then we wonder why, when leaders get into the workplace and they are responsible for the delivery of results as a team, they feel the need to control it and call others to account publicly, maybe even, really bad. Some of these bad behaviors must be heavily ingrained from almost that environment we grew up in as kids. We know in business, don't we? It's completely opposite. If I'm the boss and I win and the team loses, guess what? I lose. It's like there is no dynamic which works well in that situation. It's like we have to win as a team. So that's got to be hard to break, Rob. The second part of the question is, so when you're working with clients, and I guess you're going to say it depends, but if you were just going to give some tips for people listening to this who are thinking, oh God, I'm in that 29 to 42 category and I haven't had any formal training and I'm recognizing some of these traits, what would be some basic things they could start with? So that is about a 25-minute question. so your thoughts on the school thing and that individual, and then some thoughts for what people could do to maybe start to build this into their daily routine.
Yeah,
this is what he does.
You're actually right though. So the beliefs, the mindset, and I like to talk about mindset as our operating system. And so I'm born in 1988. And so the vast majority of our beliefs are actually formed between 0 and 7 years old. I'm running Windows 1995. That's what's controlling 95 to 97% of the decisions you make, right? And so it's totally natural to come to a point that you're listening to this show and you're going, you know what? I'm identifying some of these behaviors and I know I don't want to be mean to my people or I don't want to behave this way. It just happens. And so it's time to do a Windows update. as annoying as that is. But that's really what it is just ultimately it's starting to dig in via the emotions to what are the beliefs that we have about ourselves and then making specific choices on which ones we want to believe continuously or we want to pivot. That's it. Sounds easy. The work is a little bit tougher, right? But that's really all it is. A lot of people, I think mindset is this daily affirmations or gratitude journals. And some of those things are helpful. Absolutely. For me and what I believe, it's often just what you experienced as a child, whether you experienced it and saw it the way it was, or you saw it through the child's eyes, doesn't really matter, but it formed these beliefs that you have, these rules in your operating system. And now as an adult, you can choose what you would rather believe instead. For me, what can folks do? I have a 3-minute audio track that I can send. If anyone sends me an email, I can provide it for them. And it's just 3 minutes. It will open up a little bit of time for you to sort of start digging into your emotions and just use it. Use it when you're frustrated. Use it when you're stressed. Use it even if you're feeling good, just tune in and start listening to that voice or those voices in your mind and just see what they have to say.
We've talked a lot on this show, haven't we, Mark, about pressing the pause button to reflect and to understand your core values, not just accept, how you are is how you are. So, external locus of control versus internal locus. All of this stuff is just so interlinked, isn't it? And we could talk about it for hours, but I think it's, again, so important. If you're to be an authentic leader, you have to be able to sustain behaviours and hopefully sustain the better behaviours. and so you do need to be true to yourself as well, don't you? So this isn't a case of us saying you recreate yourself into something that's fake. But you've got to understand why you perhaps behave the way you do to then make that conscious decision as to whether you are going to change, don't you? Because if you can't fake it, as we know, not consistently.
You're right, Becky. This work actually isn't fake. It's making you more of who you are. That's the pivot. Most folks who listen to authentic leadership, they go, this means I can say what I think. And this means I can say that, you're a bad employee. That's actually wildly incorrect. And that's because that voice that's telling you to say that to somebody is not actually you. It's the protection you learned as a child. So then you could win the race or be the best at the math test or get that gold star or have your parents say, wow, you did a great job, right? But ultimately, underneath those masks is actually you. And so sometimes the first time folks do their values exercise, this is what was my in my experience. I did it, and all of my values were very performance centric. You must be a leader. You must make a lot of money. You must be the forefront. You must be this. You must be that. And then I did a bunch of work on my mind, and then they kind of changed. And it was about love and acceptance. And my two now are around wisdom and growth. And so the things that I center my days around are becoming more wise or just learning more and then growing. And then that in its own way has led to the impact that I've had that's far beyond what I would have had because I would have stayed in engineering and I would have tried to climb that corporate ladder. And that would have been a way different impact. And I would have been less fulfilled. I was, right? But we can choose what we want to become. And even I was coaching a client earlier, and he said to me, Rob, I work 12 to 14 hours a day, and then I still can't shut my mind down when I turn my computer off. I'm still thinking about what's the next email? What do I got to do? I've totally been that way too. And this is another part of us that's believing like, hey, we got to do more so then we're good enough or we're something. And once we allow that to relax, then we can finally choose our path. And that's what he's looking to do now is sort of like he said to me, I want to reach my highest potential and I know I'm not there, but I need to, like, I don't know what that is. And I don't have the bandwidth to think about that at my current way I'm thinking or like the current workload. And so you have to do the work. You kind of have to get off the treadmill before you can start to see the future.
Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it? And like that whole recognition that we do change as people as we get older and we experience more life as well, don't we? I mean, I think about my own journey and things which were important to me at the age of 31 are now no longer important to me, or they're number 10 on the list instead of number 2. So that I kind of I tend to think about it like sort of long established music bands. When, like, I don't know, let's pick one of my. I'm a thrash metaler. I love thrash metal, Rob, and like Metallica. When the '91 Black Album came out, everyone's like, "Oh, Metallica's sold out. It's rubbish." But that was reflective of where they were as people in 1991. And I think you transpose that into leadership, we become different versions of ourselves as well, and things change in our lives, things change in what we experience, and our leadership probably changes with it because it's reflective of who we are at that point in our lives as well. And then trying to pretend you were still that leader from 10 years ago, that wouldn't work because you're no longer that kind of spiky young man as I might have been. I'm more mellow, and I want the team to come on the journey. So if I tried to bring the old style back in, it wouldn't be congruent with me either. People would see through it and I wouldn't be passionate in the delivery of it because I don't truly believe in it anymore. So I think we have to, if we look in the mirror and we're honest with ourselves, we need to, as you say, tune into the emotional side and then think, okay, so how does that reflect in my leadership style, and what do I need to do to make sure it comes across in the right way to my team as well?
Absolutely. And it's more than leadership, right? Like when we talk about mindset and we talk about beliefs, like our brain is everywhere where we are. And so if we're thinking we're not good enough at work, then we're thinking we're not good enough at home. Or when maybe we're trying to date a partner and we're picking somebody who's less good. So then they feel like we feel that somehow we're adequate for them. Like there's, or even money, we're choosing a job that maybe pays us less, or we're not applying to the jobs that are that we truly want because we don't ultimately think we deserve it. And so a lot of this is subconscious, right? And so when I think about like changing our mindset, I think about it like baseball, where we're taking more reps at the plate. And so it's not that you're going to, get every job you apply for, but if you think you're good and you want to get this next opportunity, you're going to apply to more jobs that are stretch jobs. And eventually you're going to hit one. That's just math.
He woke up, sorry.
I think that resonated with Becky's dog.
Yeah, really.
I am a dog.
So if I keep asking to go for a walk, I will eventually go for a walk. I'll keep asking.
Yeah.
You got to start smaller and just set the goal to putting your running shoes on.
It's about those habits, isn't it? I guess the more I listen to you, Rob, the more I kind of wish that we did start this stuff so much earlier, because as Mark says, he's very different now to how he was when he was 31. Better, worse, who's to judge? But well, I will. But no. We all have to start somewhere, don't we? There's bound to be this quite steep learning curve. It's just that we've kind of got to get on it and go with it, haven't we? And not deny the fact that there is learning to be done and development to be done. And certainly not when we've got to the whatever we've aspired to be, in our case, partnership, go, well, that's it, then that's finished. I'm the finished article. There's nothing more to develop. I mean, for me, it's where it all started, to be honest, in terms of having to, or wanting to, and having to really invest in myself. We need people to really engage with that piece, don't we? That there is work to be done.
So you're absolutely right, Becky. And there's two attributes, I think, around this question. One is that it's incredibly hard to be vulnerable enough to look at ourselves in the mirror and say, I can do more, or I want to be more, or I need to develop, right? And the other side of it is I see this in a lot of clients, that they say something like, I'm waiting for my company to do this for me, or to pay for me, or tell me where they want me to develop. And often I go, well, where do you want to go? Right?
Yeah.
And it's like, it's great that your company paid for a corporate leadership program. Like, of course, that's part of my business, right? But it's like, if you truly go to this work and the way I do now, and basically I was forced to do this work because if I didn't do it, I would die. Like, I wouldn't be here. And a lot of folks come to this work in that way. They're burnt out. Their business is failing. They won't get promoted because they've hit a glass ceiling. Like, we see most of our clients come through the door that way. But if you actually come to this work and you're open and you're like, you know what? I want to get better. I want my business to be better. I want to feel better. I want to achieve my goals. The results actually come faster because you don't have to battle with all the internal stuff that's going on that forced you in the door. But it takes vulnerability, and it takes ownership of your own life and your own experience to say, and this is also, Mark, what we don't learn in school when we're young, right? Is we sit there and the teacher tells us what to do, and then our coach tells us what to do in sports, and our parents tell us what to do at home. And then we graduate and we go, oh, we can decide for our own now. And it's a foreign thing to think about.
I see that a lot with my team. We have a lot of trainees, and so they're going through a professional qualification, and it's quite structured. And, they can see progress, and they're obviously learning whilst at work as well. And when they come to the end of that, it can feel quite, obviously they're very pleased and very relieved to have finished that part of their learning. But then it's like, what's next? And because it's not structured, they really struggle, because they've gone from school to maybe further education to work where it's all been structured for them, this learning. And then it's just like, I mean, Mark will tell you I'm not very good with a blank piece of paper, but it seems to me that there's too much, and so they sometimes end up doing nothing. You can provide direction, but you can't do it for people, can you? And so, I think as soon as you get out of that structured environment, whether it's education, work, whatever it is, it can seem quite daunting. And as employers, we offer options, but we have to be, very much about people need to want to do it as well, don't they? They're not just ticking a box.
This work doesn't work if you don't want to do it.
Yeah, and Becky and I have talked about this so much, haven't we? Which is, for me, that as an employer, and this is based on my map of the world and my journey, because I have a real thirst for knowledge and I like reading different stuff, and I just want to, I try and read as much varied stuff as I can, because I think the more varied, it just helps with the neuroplasticity, because you're just really challenging it in a different way. I've always looked at, even when I was an employee, I always looked at it as, this is a catalyst. I can go on a course or a program through the business, and that was always just a catalyst. That's all I ever looked at it as. I didn't look at it as, I've been on the course, right? Okay, that's it, I've done it. And it's almost, and I talk to my team about this, and I know Becky does as well, because we've talked about it endlessly, which is, just invest in yourself, because this isn't just about helping our business like in Gowan, it's about helping yourself, because these are life skills as well, so just invest in yourself. But I don't know whether it's a generational thing, but it appears to me, but I'm old, so I can be grumpy and cynical. It does appear that maybe now there's not quite as much desire to, it's almost like, what can you provide for me, rather than that true, here's a catalyst, now go and take on the world off the back of it. And I it's because it's the journey I've been on, and I've really enjoyed that learning experience. The other thing it's also done, and I think this plays into what you've been talking about as well, Rob, is when I was young, I was very black and white. And that, some of that was, it's definitely the environment I grew up in, the influential people around me. It's very much right, wrong, black, white, left, right, doesn't matter what it is. It was very much kind of like, had to be like that. And I grew up in that environment, in, I guess it was the UK environment at the time as well. The more I read and the wider I read, the more I realized that actually hardly anything in life is black and white. It's all just different shades of, 50 Shades of Grey. There you go, Becky. I'm sure you've watched that film. But it's all different shades of grey, isn't it? and once you suddenly realize that actually nothing is fixed, it's very variable, it does take a lot of pressure off, because you don't feel like you've got to be right all the while, because what is right anyway? And I heard a guy, I think his name is Robert Edward Grant. I've listened to a few of his podcasts, and he talks about facets of truth. He said when he was younger, he thought everything was facts, but as he's got older, he realized it's just a facet of the truth. There's no such thing as fact. And I thought, what a great way to look at it. I'd never thought of a way to encapsulate it like that. But that really took the pressure off me when I realized it didn't have to be right, wrong, black or white anymore.
It's interesting, right? And this is true, right? Is it's all perspective. And each of us have a slightly different one, right? And we've learned those perspectives through our experiences. I wouldn't say it's necessarily generational. It's just each person can have a different perspective. They've learned different things. And I think the hard part is exactly what you're right, Mark, is early in our lives, right? Everything has to be black or white, because in school you either got it right or you didn't get it right. You either scored the goal or you didn't score the goal. Even early in our careers, right? It's like when we're individual contributors, like you made the sale, you didn't make the sale. You built a bridge that works or your bridge collapsed, or you know what I mean? It's like these things are very structured and very black and white. Where as we get into leadership or we advance our careers, now we're dealing with teams of people and they have opinions and they want to feel a certain way. And that is very much about managing expectations and perspectives and listening and caring and those type of elements. And so it is an evolution. And some folks find freedom in that, like you did, Mark. Other folks, it feels very destabilizing, because if I'm used to being right and now I'm out of control of being right, and that's when I lean into some of these bad boss behaviors, because now I'm forcing folks to conform to my narrative so I can be right. And so it can go either way, but either way, it's an opportunity for us to grow and get better.
That's so interesting. I hadn't thought about bad bosses in that way, in terms of getting their team to conform to what they believe, to what the boss believes is right, is maybe the only thing that they can control, because if other things feel uncontrollable, and so they will exert their control in that way. And That's really interesting. If you think about experiences that you've had, you're like, oh, I get that. But just sort of tracking back a little bit, just because it intrigues me. We had another podcast guest on a couple of weeks ago talking about values as well. And just for the benefit of the listeners, we asked what sort of exercises might help listeners to understand their values. So it's just, you said that you had done quite a lot of work on that yourself and exercises. Is there something relatively simple to explain that you would suggest to listeners that they might try to better understand their values?
Yeah, totally. The way I coach folks to do it, well, we have a few different ways, but the one I like is you can just go online and find a list of, there's like 206 values on, I think it's jamesclear.com. But anyways, you just Google a list. And then just make one is do a quick breathing or make sure you feel relaxed and centered, and then just run through the list and divide it into 3 piles. So yes, this is me, maybe this is me, and definitely not. And then you may end up with a pile of like 40 in the yes pile, or you may end up with 5, right? But then you can sort of run through that list again until you land somewhere between 5 and 10 in the yes. And then I love the Brene Brown tip where she says, narrow that list, keep the 5 to 10, obviously, but narrow the 5 to 10 down to 2 core values that you can use to drive your decisions. Because her thesis is that if you have 5 to 10, it's hard to make a decision. But if you have 2, you can very much be aware of, hey, this new job opportunity, what is it? Which value does it help me go after? And if it fits one of your 2 core values, it's a definitely yes. And you can use that for your life decisions. And just as Mark mentioned, is your value shift. So I always recommend folks to do it like every 6 months, or if they have a major life event, like you got promoted or you had a kid or you got married or, you moved, like look at those decisions and how they've shifted your values.
That's very similar to the exercise that I did on my probably first significant leadership course as a new partner, where we had all the values as like a set of cards, and so you sort of dismissed the ones that didn't resonate with you, and you had a pile, and then you narrowed the pile down. Very similar exercise, but I found it so, because you have to make the decision quickly, as long as you're in the right state, as you say, it's incredibly powerful, because you end up with these, like you say, probably 10 that really do resonate with you. But thank you for sharing that. I just wanted to see if there was, a quick and easy way that you thought people could do it. Of course, the answer was Google it, or what search engine.
Yeah, I'll send you one that we offer as an alternative solution. It's harder to get 10, in my opinion, with this one, but it's a meditation track that I use for folks. And I really feel like it'll help people get maybe the 1 or 2 that are really important to them. But I'll send it to you and you can use it and see how it goes.
Brilliant. We will. Thank you so much. That would be great.
The other one I noticed, Becky, is when I get irate about stuff, which I don't as much as I used to, if I get passionate about something and Glenda's like, oh, you're getting a little bit passionate about that, that probably helps drive me to what my core value is as well. Because it's if I'm getting that engaged emotionally about something, I must be able to pick the value out of it.
Yeah. But I think what Rob said, you said about, 2 core values will help you make your decisions. They're like your check, aren't you? You just check yourself against those. Does it fit with those? Yes or no? I think that's incredibly powerful. But like you say, you have to keep it refreshed. You have to be very conscious that they're not going to be the ones that will stand you instead forevermore. And just, people who are black and white might find that bit a bit tricky.
Unbelievably, we've been talking for nearly an hour now. I'm not sure where that's gone. So conscious of your time, and we're very grateful for the time you've given us. We're going to move into our final 2 closing questions, which we asked all of our guests, and we've given you the heads up on. So hopefully it's given you a chance to have some thoughts around it. So the first one is, if you were going to recommend 3 books or podcasts, something which is related to the topic we're talking about today, what would they be and why?
Totally. So the first book I have for folks is No Bad Parts by Dr. Richard Schwartz. And he's the creator, he's a world-renowned psychologist. And and the creator of internal family systems, which we use in our coaching practice. And it will give you a similar way that I was talking about wearing different masks and the beliefs that lay under those. He has a way of giving you a system to look at the world where things will make sense, especially if you're kind of a left brain type person. It'll help you look at the world and understand behaviors and why they're appearing in these ways. And it's incredibly powerful. It's something that we use in our coaching practice. It's also something that I really put into the conflict management program we run, because then you can look at folks and go, oh yeah, that's not you who's the asshole. It's this certain part of you that's frustrated about whatever. And so it allows you, one is to give you yourself distance if you behave in those ways, but also with other folks.
Yeah. And I know the guy. I don't know him personally, but he was on the Aubrey. Yeah, he was on the Aubrey Marcus podcast. I think it was episode 422. So I think he calls him Dick Schwartz. He obviously knows him better than we do. But it was a really interesting podcast. So I think, yeah, I'm 100% behind you on that. I found it fascinating just listening to what he was talking about. So yeah, I haven't read the book, so I'm definitely gonna get the book off that one.
Yeah, we had him on our pod, and I do know him personally now.
Okay,
but
brilliant.
But yeah, he's an incredible guy. He's definitely done the work, so he's legit.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this next one is Untethered Soul by Michael Singer. And again, it's this element of starting to tune into what's going on in our minds. He talks a lot about the shadow and the one and the chatter. And I think it's very helpful for folks to start looking at, like, it's a different way of talking about it compared to Dick, but it's also another way to sort of open up what's going on in your mind and see the world a little bit differently. Yeah, so this one is a little bit of a detour, but it's The 7 Rules of Power by Jeffrey Pfeffer. And Jeffrey Pfeffer is a professor at Stanford Business School, and he's the one who actually did the research about the fifth leading cause of death is management. But he writes a lot about power, and this book talks about the 7 rules of power, and you can use them either to influence folks to gain your own power, but also you can see how folks are gaining power and what the research talks about, where it does say things like indexing high in narcissism gets you promoted. So some of you can start to identify these bad boss behaviors, and there's actually scientific proof that says some of them work. Obviously, it's not helpful for folks who feel bad or are left in the kind of toxic waste, but when you can identify those behaviors, you can also use them in the right way. And so I think it's very helpful for folks to sort of open up their journeys.
Very much. And then our final question is around 3 pieces of advice that you would say to an 18-year-old or at least a younger Rob.
The first caveat to all of this is the 18-year-old me would never believe the 35-year-old.
I think that's standard.
But yeah, I mean, the first piece of advice I would have for 18-year-old me is your mind is not your mind. And this is really what I've learned through doing my own internal family systems in therapy and as part of learning about it. But it's often the voices we hear in our minds are those parts of us that are demanding us to get acceptance or belonging or to look better or all these things. And it's not you. And once you can start to separate yourself from those things, then you can actually choose how you want to behave and show up in the world, which ultimately gets you better results and you'll feel better. But that's a whole other story. The second piece of advice would be to go to therapy. I never would have thought I would have needed it. I never would have thought that I would have problems with my mental health. But looking back at what I know now, it's very clear. I mean, also just the way I understand psychology is all this trauma, whether it's big T trauma or little t trauma, it impacts all of us. And the sooner you can get ahead of that, the more you can truly be happier, more fulfilled, and choose your life how you want it to be. And then the last one I have is never stop developing yourself and who you are. And we talked a lot about this. But actually, when I graduated college, I was sort of like, yeah, I'm good. And then I did well in my job. And then I had all these problems with my mental health. And what happened was I started sort of believing the Kool-Aid that, like, if I pushed harder and I tried to get more things done, that the world would push me back. And that was, I kind of entered a protective shell to sort of protect myself from the pain I felt. And that took me about, 7, 8 years to overcome that piece. And it's, yeah, it's not easy. And obviously I went through some very traumatic stuff, but I think for folks out there, it's where we landed before, right? Is it takes an incredible amount of vulnerability to look at yourself and go, I could be better, or I could do more, or I could not be in this path that I thought I would be. And excavating your values and how you believe and your strengths, these are things that you can craft who you are. And then you can also start crafting who you want to become. And it's really cool to do that.
Yeah, those bits are they going to resonate with Becky and I? I mean, we Becky and I have talked endlessly about, how in the past you basically you had to just keep picking yourself up by your bootstraps and going again and going again when you're younger, because actually certainly during the late 80s, early mid 90s, no one thought about therapy, whether it be just talking to a coach even can be therapeutic, or whether it be formal therapy. And that we've often reflected on times where we'd perhaps get to the car park as a junior accountant and you'd sit in the car thinking, I really can't do this today, but you had to give yourself a talking to, and then you went in, but you had no one to share that with. You couldn't go home and tell your parents about it because they'd be like, well, you just need to grow a pair, Mark, and get on with it, or whatever it would be. It was like, very, very macho culture almost. And that was incredibly unhealthy, because although we ended up coming through that and, progressing in our careers, it took a real toll on physical and mental health as you had to do that. And there had to be an easier way. And I think everything you've talked about is, there is an easier way. We have to fight for some things. We get that, but it doesn't have to be a constant battle. When it becomes a battle, not a fight, then it feels too much sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that as leaders, we have a responsibility to let our teams know that it's okay to be vulnerable, and actually, continuous learning and development. I mean, that third point resonates with me so much. It's about promoting how we're always looking to develop ourselves, and I'm never shy of the fact that if I've got something that I'm attending external to work, or something I'm doing that's in that field, I will promote it rather than hide it from the team, because I just think if they see us doing it, then it makes it okay for them to do it, and the sooner they start, the sooner they will see the benefits, isn't it? And also, once you start on the road, you can't not continue, can you? I think, because you just find more and more stuff that feeds you.
Once you start seeing the winds trickle in, it's hard to stop.
Rob, 3 brilliant pieces of advice. Thank you so much. And thank you for really taking the time to consider those, because it really came across that you had. So thank you. And thank you for your time today. It's been absolutely fascinating. And well, we're very conscious that we've taken up rather a lot of your time, and we could talk around this for a lot longer. So we very much appreciate you joining us. For our listeners, if they want to reach out to you, and you've mentioned several times that you're happy for them to do so, how best should they contact you?
Yeah, totally. If they want the free meditation track, just send me an email, Rob at Elite High Performance. or you can add me on LinkedIn, Rob Kalwarowsky. That either way will work. Yeah, and if you want to excavate, do some one-on-one personal leadership development, one-on-one coaching, or group corporate programs, just again, you can check out elitehighperformance.com for all that information, or you can shoot me an email. And then check out the podcast. So Leadership Launchpad Project, available wherever you're listening to Life and Leadership. We've had Dr. Schwartz on. We've done a few other episodes talking about internal family systems with folks. And we also talk about leadership and growth and all these other things too. So if you check out the archive, there's around 150 episodes now. So there's lots there.
Brilliant. Thank you. We'll make sure we put all of that in the show notes for our listeners. So once again, thank you so much for your time. We've really enjoyed having you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Mark, a fascinating conversation there with Rob. You and I know we could have chatted to him for hours. As ever, we like to find 3 key things that really resonated with us. So what's your first one?
Yeah, absolutely, Becky. Rob, what a great guest. And the fact that he'd been through such a traumatic journey, which led him out the other side into helping others, I think that really makes him an expert on this topic, because he's had to live and breathe it from all angles. So absolutely fantastic. But yeah, as you say, crikey, three picking out of this one. The first one for me was when Rob was talking about the 6 stereotypical bosses, and then he was saying the stats around that 65% of employees are going to come across one of those 6 types. That's like 2/3 of employees are working under a toxic, or have worked under, or will work under a toxic boss. And then the second part of that stat was, in 70% of people who questioned who leave a job is because of a specific manager. Not just people who display general types, but because of a specific individual. So, as leaders, if ever we need to hold the mirror up to ourselves or challenge our colleagues who are also leaders with us in business, that those stats are compelling evidence as to why we should.
Absolutely. And I think, there's that saying, isn't there, that people don't leave jobs, they leave their boss. And it's exactly true. It is about people at the end of the day. So, yeah, I think really, really hard-hitting stats that we all need to take notice of. The second point for me would be the piece that Rob said about people tend to be promoted to management leadership roles around the age of 29, but they don't get any training until the age of 42. And, that period of time where potentially you're just acting on the basis of role model behaviour, things that you've seen in others, which perhaps might be positive but might not. I think, there's nothing for me that says louder, let's help our people, support them, encourage them, demonstrate to them that we are all learning all the time, and the sooner we start on this journey, the better. You can never start too soon. And we often talk about leader culture, don't we? And that everyone has a leadership role in our teams. And I think we need to talk about that more and really promote the fact that none of us are the finished article. We all need to keep developing. So that's a very long-winded point 2 from me.
Yeah, but what a massive point. I mean, another staggering fact which Rob, laid on us today, that 13-year gap where people are not getting the training as a leader, and then that links into the first point about people leaving. We've got the war for talent, etc. But also that other point which came out of that, which is that it's the 5th leading cause of death. Yeah. This toxic culture at work because of the stress involved. So if anyone listens, don't just do it for yourself, do it for the health of your team as well. Yeah. I mean, these are people's lives we're talking about here. So yeah, massive point. So the third one, Becky, it was really where Rob was talking about how, as you develop as a leader and the trust in yourself grows, and then, it can really help you tune into your emotions and become, if you are displaying some of those toxic characteristics, you can really start to move out of those as you trust yourself more. And the other thing which came out was being authentic. And I think the more you trust yourself, the more likely you are to be the authentic self because you're comfortable in your own skin. So, and I think Rob said that whole thing about imposter syndrome where, 70% or something he said, but as he said, in his opinion, it's kind of in his experience 100%. And I don't think I've met anyone who hasn't had imposter syndrome either.
No.
So the more we can overcome this, again, I think all these 3 points are linked, and they're just incredibly important for the health of ourselves as leaders, but also our team.
Couldn't agree more. Thank you for listening. If you don't already, please follow us on your chosen platform. Rating us 5 stars really helps other people find us, which we would really appreciate. Links to all the things that we've talked about will be in the show notes, so find those there. And also in the show notes will be a link to our sponsors, Lark & Gown. A big thank you to them. Without them, we couldn't do this. Please have a look at their website to see how their accountants and business advisors can help you and your business. So that just leaves us to say, have a great week, and don't forget, be kind to yourself and boost your health, wealth and self.